the level of theory versus practicals in academic institutions. That once these students graduate, they are not able, they find what they meet out there in the job market is something that is totally different from what they were being taught, because they never experienced the theory, the practical part of it. I want you to talk to us a bit on how it is important for practicals in achieving a knowledge-led economy.
It's very crucial, and what we need are 21st century institutions. And the African Institute of Mathematical Sciences, with the next Einstein Forum, are creating spaces like this. Here in Kigali, we have the Carnegie Mellon Africa campus, we have the African Leadership University, we have Mass Design, the African Design Center. There are a number of projects happening that are really about bringing Africa to the 21st century and for Africa to lead technologically. And if we can lead technologically, we can build prosperity for all our citizens. And so the practical is crucial. And for me, as a professor of practice for public-private partnerships, what we don't realize in Africa is that in Europe, in North America, in Australia, in Asia, the public invests heavily in research and academia to ensure that scientists are serving the communities, that are serving their nation's advancement so that they're competitive economically. And this is what the next Einstein Forum is facilitating and enabling, is catalyzing those relationships, those partnerships to ensure that the ecosystem for innovating in Africa leads to building prosperity.
Right. Right, and it's important also, like picking up from Josh as well as you come in, because this, as Thierry said, it's the mother of all forums that brings out those who are the creme de la creme in science and leveraging science in terms of changing lives in wherever platforms we go to. For Johnson & Johnson specifically, a very great brand that we've all known from the time we were young, from the baby powder and all that. How significant is such a forum for institutions like yours?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me. I think for Johnson & Johnson, we've been around for 135 years. It's the largest healthcare company in the world, but it was built exactly through entrepreneurs early on, research at universities that actually continue to drive our innovation. So it's a big part of it is what research goes on at universities that turns into startups, that turns into bigger companies. I think if you look from knowledge, from technology, everything that's happening today, yes, everybody talks about Silicon Valley, but majority of it, actually a lot of the ideas start at universities. And for me, I think when I look at Africa, I went to school in Africa and moved to US to go to university. So all my high school training was right here in Eritrea and Sudan. And it's interesting going there, everything becomes more practical. And this is going to be a key part of what we need to do in Africa, is to take what's happening with AIMS, with Next Einstein Forum, is that one, the scientific foundation that needs to continue to be developed through those institutions, but also how do you continue to give outlets for those ideas to become real solutions? I think for us, for the past 2 years, actually, for me, it was actually the motivation was the first Einstein Forum. I attended in Dakar 2 years ago. Immediately after I left that meeting, we started what's called Africa Innovation Challenge. And basically, we went to all 54 countries. We actually, somehow, even though we only launched it in 10 countries and made it to all 54 countries, we received over 500 ideas from technology to healthcare, real challenges that exist in Africa, and solutions. People had a lot of great ideas. We selected 3. Actually, our 3 winners are going to be here in Kigali talking about their experience in working with industry, and they completely transformed their businesses. These were simple ideas that people had. They just need the network, whether it's through the universities, whether it's industry, working with them, because the mentorship becomes very important.
Right.
And for me, I think this is the link that we need to continue to build, is that what's happening at the academic level, industry actually helping, because one of the biggest advantages Silicon Valley and others have in the US, in Europe, is that there's significant mentorship available. And for me, I think this is where I think our industry could play. And for Johnson & Johnson, it's a simple concept we have, that the only way to create innovation is actually people that are in those countries that are dealing with those challenges are the only ones that could actually solve it.
Right.
So Africa's challenges are not going to be solved by somebody sitting in Silicon Valley or somewhere else. We need people in Africa to solve the challenges, and we're just here to help.
Right. And this is very important here. I want to come to you because tonight we're talking about whether achieving a knowledge-led economy is actually a fact or just a myth. for many people, you know, we have actually seen how the economies in Africa and most African countries have been, you know, have been agrarian economies where, you know, agriculture plays a big responsibility in their economies. And if we talk about, you know, Rwanda specifically, the economy of Rwanda grew tremendously, and most of the time they pinpoint the role that agriculture has really played in this sector. I want to understand from your point of view, do you feel that most of African economies are ready to move to the knowledge-led economies, or are they going to still remain on, you know, mostly agriculture, which is not so much mechanized, or resources, minerals to boost the economies? Do you feel this is a reality, or it is just a myth, something that we're just talking about and chasing the mirage?
First of all, Eugene, let me tell you that African nations have no choice but to target deliberately knowledge-led economy. And they have to do whatever needs to be done to get it, to achieve it. Another concrete example, you know, when you look around globally, Africa bears 25% of the burden of diseases. And yet, we only contribute to 2% of global research output. So how are you going to heal your citizens if you don't invest in knowledge? If you don't invest in idea generation, how are you going to take care of the public health? You cannot take care of the public health, the health of your farmers, if there's no ideas, no invention, concrete research output, good research that translates into developmental impact or reaches the market. So to me, third, you look at countries like Saudi Arabia, they're anticipating that oil will dry up. Most natural commodities, most natural resources in Africa will dry up. Be it in 50 years or 100 years, it will dry up one day. The only thing that will remain is knowledge and information, out of which we can build our nations. Look at Israel. Don't go to Israel. Look at Rwanda. Rwanda is not a massively endowed country in natural resources. What is driving the economy of this country is services, is technology. And the country leaders have understood. And that's why they're doing. But what is going to take? This is where we need to have a serious discussion.
Right, yes.
You know, when you want to achieve a knowledge-led economy, you've got simple chain. Number one, you've got to transform the way your people learn.
We need to transform the way our people learn. All right,
so
how do we do this?
Traditional
Yes.
education system, where we go to school to learn by region memorization, will not help Africa. You have people who have book knowledge, master's degree and PhD. They're not employable. They can't get anything done. They have never learned to solve problems, to be critical thinkers, to be innovators. So we have to transform the educational systems into an ecosystem for learning where people are capable of critical thinking. That's the first step of the chain. The second step, you know, it's the second step of the ecosystem is the knowledge creation. This is where you enable people, young people in the learning ecosystem to come up with new ideas, critical ideas, to invent stuff. But it doesn't stop there. Once you've got the invention stage, you need to move whatever good idea is coming out from critical thinking, from research, into prototyping. There is piloting. If, for instance, you have a research scientist from the University of Rwanda who comes up with a great solution to heal malaria or to whatever diseases is out there, you need to pilot this and make sure that it works. When you pilot it, if it works, you demonstrate. You demonstrate, you industrialize. That's the chain. But the big issue facing most African countries who are already doing this is what we call the valley of death. Between the idea generated, for the idea generated to move to piloting and demonstration, if there's funding lacking, if there's no funding, no proper infrastructure, the idea may die.
It dies over there. I mean, Elian, I mean, for you, I mean, I want to hear from you based on the 2 points that he mentioned, critical points that he mentions, changing our approach to education and then also giving opportunities for people to go through those stages of prototype, testing the idea. Well, if it works, then we pick it and Johnson & Johnson takes it up and then this inventor or innovator is happy. How do we do this? How do we make sure that these opportunities don't miss us if we don't fix this? I mean,
so the great thing is Africa has a lot of problems, and all those challenges are opportunities. And our opportunities are the greatest space for creativity that can be turned into inventions, that can be turned into products that can be of service to the continent. Because the really important thing about innovation is innovation in context. If you look at one of our first African billionaires, Mo Ibrahim, how did he make his money? Telecom. Because the space of telecom was bare in Africa. Everything needed to be done. And so there are a lot of places in Africa in terms of the challenges that we face that are all opportunities for creating prosperity.
The challenges we are not tapping into those
Yes.
opportunities.
Yes.
There's this valley of death he spoke about.
Absolutely.
How do we save ourselves from it?
So part of it is how do we train people to be able to solve solutions so that investors want to help them through the valley of death. Mm-hmm. And so we have to ensure that scientifically they're trained at the best standards possible. And AIMS, of course, is doing that, bringing Nobel Prize winners to Africa to help us train our young people. And also, it's what is the quality of leadership that goes into training our young and preparing them for the future. So as one of the pre-events here for the next Einstein Forum, I just led a workshop on leadership for women in science. And we had 40 women from all over the continent. We had young, early career scientists, mid-career and senior scientists. And so we had opportunities for all of these 3 levels of scientists to be interacting. We also had men who came as mentors to help the women in their careers. And so what we teach them is how do you vision your leadership? How do you tell your story so that investors want to be part of your journey? How do you negotiate for win-win situations so that the investors, that the scientists, that the universities involved, that the policymakers, that everybody wins as you move forward? And also, how, when you have all of that established, how do you ensure that you have the mentors, the champions, the coaches that are going to help you go through the different stages of advancing from creation to innovation to prototyping to scaling to businesses that are serving the whole planet? And so each stage requires different types of leadership, different types of skills. And we want to ensure that our population, and specifically, I want women to be very involved. Because the women of Africa think not only of themselves, but they think of their children. So the innovations that we really want to promote, because if we see between now and 2050, half the children that are going to be born on this planet are going to be born here in Africa. And we want every one of those children to have the opportunity to be the next Einstein.
Right. Very powerful. Josh, I mean, you could also pick from the same, and I'm very interested in you sharing how can these young innovators escape and save themselves from this valley of death that
I think they both perfectly hit it in the head, which is one of the things we do the most is actually we teach people what's called design thinking. And this is the fundamental concept, not just the chemistry, the math, everything that the fundamentals people need to know, but design thinking says that you have to know what the real problems are, and you could actually try to solve those. But this concept of failing fast, being able to experiment, to prototype very quickly, and then move to the next one is the most critical fundamental thing that's working, especially in technology space, especially in healthcare, being able to prototype and be able to move constantly. I think that's a fundamental need, and I think part of the education system has to change so that it's no longer just the academic training, but the soft skills that are needed, which is how do you become competency in workplace, competency in startups, which is design thinking, leadership, being able to connect with people, collaborate with people, because being on your own in one place doesn't help you at all. So when you look at whether it's Google, Apple, I mean, if you look at an iPhone, it's made by 7 different companies, contribute to every iPhone that's made. There's a reason for that. You don't need to build everything yourself, so you could continue to create that ecosystem that Thierry talked about. So for us, I think companies like J&J, we try to catch things really early. Give us some of the best ideas you have early on, and we'll walk you through what steps you need to go to.
Right.
And I think that's going to be a key portion of how you build this in the future.
Right.
Crossing the valley of death, Eugene, I want to build on what George and Lilian just said, requires critical, innovative funding instruments. Let me say, you take the example of Europe. To deploy bio-based industry, that is the use of biomass to develop biorefineries, they set up public partnership, private partnership funding of 3.7 billion euros. 2.7 of it comes from the private investment. So one thing that we're not succeeding in doing enough in Africa, we have industry leaders, but they're slow to join forces with the dynamic.
How do we catalyze this? How do we
expedite
this?
How do we expedite this? Yes. It takes greater involvement from public agencies, because industry leaders won't walk into anything you're doing, piloting, be it a great, bright, brilliant next Einstein ideas. You need public agencies to support the piloting. When you support it, the pilot works. It sends a strong signal to the industry that they need to catch up the train. Otherwise, they might not be able to benefit from it. So they will join forces with that. But without public engagement, without public involvement at the basis, when you look at countries in the US and Europe, they invest heavily in research. Our countries across Africa has committed, I guess, 1% of the GDP investment in research. But I believe, I may be wrong, none of them is reaching, it have reached that level of 1%. So we must revisit and streamline and increase public investment in research, idea generation, piloting, with a strong backup from government. And industry leaders, we must hold them accountable. They're employing talent on the continent. There's no way we can see Pan-African private sector organizations across the continent staying aloof and wait for government, wait for academics to do everything, and then just benefit for it. There's an accountability issue. It's a matter of responsibility if we care about the transformation of the continent.
Right, Elian, how would we hold this, institutions accountable? He passionately says it, how they sit back, they take a back seat and wait for, governments to invest in this R&D and all that, only for them to consume this. How practical is what he's saying going to be like?
So I've been on the Presidential Advisory Council of Rwanda for a decade. And one of the things that Rwanda has done is the primary focus really when the rebuilding of the country was how do we revive agriculture? How do we revive tourism? So the social innovations that the country, the policymakers brought really created a space where we were building areas of economic growth. And so the focus on education, we really had to start from the bottom up. And so Rwanda now, we see ourselves that we are ready for really tertiary education to be leading because the base, we have worked on the base. So it's really important to focus on the base to create very strong partnerships, partnering for excellence. So partnering governments, global industry leaders, partners in the social and nonprofit sector, activism in citizen activism, and to bring all of this together so that you really have positive social movements. Every part of society, every sector has to be involved. And so we have to create a system where there's shared values, where everybody feels committed and inspired to bring the best, whether you're industry, whether you're policymakers, whether you're citizen and community groups. And this really creates a de-risking factor for investors, because investors want to make sure that there's an ecosystem that is functional. Broken ecosystems don't allow funding to come and to scale and to build prosperity. So really ensuring that the strength of that ecosystem for innovation, enabling policies, enabling financing, enabling education levels, critical thinking, strategy, design thinking, human-centered design, because you cannot innovate outside of context. So I worked in the biotechnology sector in Canada for a number of years. And when I decided to come back and see what could be done, the first workshop I held over 10 years ago was how do we build African bioeconomies? And what I realized is that all of my knowledge as a molecular geneticist was absolutely useless if policymakers didn't know how to harness what I did to have the laboratory facilities, the training for young students to get where they needed to get so that they could start innovating. And so really, it's very interesting to me because now, one of the things in terms of the next Einstein Forum, there's been phenomenal pre-events. And one of the events I attended was the launch of Rawisi, which is the Rwandan Women in Science Association. And a lot of the young women at that forum, they remember me over 10 years ago at the first International Conference in Natural Resources that was held in Rwanda in 2007. And they said because of me, they went on to get their PhDs. And those PhDs are anywhere from chemical engineering to human genetics to looking at GIS and how satellites can help us help small farmers to increase the productivity on small plots of land. And so how we inspire the next generation and how we work at it consistently. Because we cannot stop. We cannot say we're going to work one day. Every single day we keep at it. And the great thing about having this event here in Rwanda in 2018 is Rwanda has been working diligently to enable an ecosystem that attracts all of the players that are coming to the next Einstein Forum and want to contribute to continuing to scale this.
Great, great. And Josh, I mean, Thierry mentioned the role of the private sector and the fence-sitting aspect, which really annoys him from the voice and the tone of his voice. He didn't feel like this is something that is good. I mean, most of the private sector institutions would always want to jump into something that makes profit. If it doesn't make profit, then count me out. This is what they usually say. If there's no incentive for me to jump into it, then also count me out. How do we change this attitude and make our private sector be a sector that rewards failure? You know, if an inventor or innovator comes with an innovation, and even if it doesn't work, they can actually still reward that and give it a chance to even work better. How do we change this?
I think the industry is starting to recognize that has to change. To give you an idea, for us at Johnson & Johnson, we started in the US. I think we already announced something in Europe and in Asia that we're doing, which is what's called J-Labs.
Yes.
This is to allow, to get into healthcare. A startup, it's a very costly process. Just to set up a lab, it costs a lot. So we thought that the best way to actually encourage entrepreneurs to actually go into healthcare and address some big challenges is actually to make the facilities available to them. So what we decided in J-Labs is actually we opened up new labs and people can apply to move into our labs and work there and no strings attached. We said you don't have to sign anything with us. Just continue to work with us. We'll give you the space. You have all the lab equipment that you need. And if you like us at some point, you might want to work with us.
Right.
But at least we'll give you the mentoring, the education, a lot of the things that you need to develop your idea further. I think that's what Africa needs. To give you an idea, I mean, there's over 300 tech hubs already built. So to Thierry's point, if the public sector doesn't start encouraging that, not only industry, but you also need a lot of private investors. There's VC money that comes in to accelerate some of those ideas. And that's when actually, usually when VCs get involved, it becomes very clear what you need to do. The experimentation becomes very regimented and it's very clear what needs to happen. But none of them are going to come unless when all these tech hubs are being built across Africa, how do you get the public? And Rwanda has been a perfect example. I think we're seeing it in Nairobi. We've seen it in Ghana. Governments that actually have stepped up to say, we're all for innovation. We're all about driving basically technology, information that actually accelerates the knowledge of what people need to make their farming much more productive, their communication, logistics. I mean, you can go on and on about how technology and data actually changes how you see your productivity. So I think for me, the public is going to be a big part of it, the public sector. Especially people are starting this in Africa. It's people are recognizing 300 tech hubs. That's a lot if you think about it. And so far, my last numbers was over 40 different countries have tech hubs in their located in their countries. So how do you accelerate that? How does, similar to what clear guideline that Rwanda has done to advance technology and to advance innovation, we need that from most African countries. And I think if you do that, if there is a support system, most VCs, most private investors, most industry will step in.
Will jump in.
Yeah.
Thierry, he speaks of the number of the tech hubs, and someone listening is like, whoa, we have all those.
Yeah.
And the question that comes to mind is, what is coming out of them?
Yeah.
That we can put a finger on and say, this invention or this innovation came out of this country or this continent that is actually out there being put to use, saving lives of people out there. That's the question that most people wonder, you know, at the end of the day.
Yeah, before I jump on to respond to that question, I would update George's number. It's roughly 500 now across 90 cities. And that, you're true, because it's growing.
Yes.
Maybe as we speak.
Someone else is working on something to launch more.
And this tells you of one thing, that there's a great opportunity, a huge asset that we have on this continent, the young people. They're eager to learn, they're hungry for knowledge, they want to discover, they want to invent. Some of them are trying their very best to put that in place. When I take the example of a country like Rwanda, why is AIMS here? Why are we having the next Einstein Forum here? Because we found in Rwanda a conducive policy regulatory framework that makes it possible for science to enjoy making science, doing science here. It's a very important. It takes strategic thinking, a strategic leadership to deploy that. Now, what is coming out of those tech hubs? Some of them may die. They say 3 out of 5 of them dies between the age of 0 to 5 years. Why? Number one, for lack of a funding instrument. B, for lack of research and development. That's why one of the lessons learned from our end at AIMS, no tech hub should be, well, I'm not going to say no tech hub, but tech hubs should evolve within an ecosystem. Like what Rwanda is creating here, Kigali Innovation City, like what Senegal is creating in Dakar, the Cité de Savoir, like what is being created in Nairobi and in Cotonou, Seme City. It's within those ecosystems that if you, Eugene, you start your tech hub, you don't need to worry about too much investment in R&D, because you've got Josh, who is an academic, who is a research scientist, doing research that you can benefit from. And then you've got Eliane having some funding mechanism that you could tap into. If you want to cover those by yourselves on your own, you might not be able to achieve much. But the bottom line is, there are great things coming out of those tech hubs. They're solving problems, practical problems relevant to our people, to villages, to farmers. They're trying to improve the farming techniques. They're trying to enhance the way we communicate. And you just have to see how we're mastering and using mobile technology today. These things are coming from the tech hub. But the things that is going to really transform our continent, it's going to take a more deliberate ecosystem approach,
right,
and strategic guidance, and under a Pan-African institutional umbrella. No country on its own can make it to compete on the global stage.
Right.
That's why I really applaud what happened here under the leadership of President Kagame last week or this week. It's important. It should not just be for trade. It should also be for research mobility.
Right.
There are still countries across Africa where researchers can now move from one country to another. I have an example right now where an Einstein fellow cannot move from where he is. Don't ask me to name the country, because if he goes back, he might lose his immigration status.
Wow.
So this is what is going on. It's really upsetting and outrageous to still have a young, bright scientist not being able to move to Rwanda to show what he's doing. So this is important.
Yeah.
Before we ask of tech and academia and the ecosystem what they're doing, it's important that regulatory framework makes it possible for them to do what they're going to do.
Right. Elian, I mean, I'd love to hear your thoughts as I also stand to go and see what our viewers are saying on our social media platforms. Just keep talking to me. Tell me what you think about what Thierry says as far as the ecosystem is concerned. Why are we not seeing, you know, each of all these institutions plugging in together for the aim of encouraging these young innovators to actually deliver in this knowledge-led economies?
So one of the things that we underestimate and most people don't realize is public-private partnerships build social capital. Mm-hmm. And social capital, does it really mean in science and technology? It gives the opportunity for people to fail forward towards success. Mm-hmm. If you look at the light bulb, it took 1,001 tries to get it right. When it was finally right, somebody became one of the richest people on the planet, mm-hmm. but he had to fail 1,000 times.
Today, the industry players will tell you we have no time.
Well,
we do not have 1,000 years to wait.
We can fail forward, we can fail fast. Mm-hmm. And the idea of giving our youth lots of opportunity allows them to fail fast, fail forward, and to learn. Because one of the things we want executives that have experience, that have creativity, that have diversity of experiences. And the more we deploy that on the continent, the greater data we have and the acceleration of the process we can create to build prosperity forward. And so these networks allow us to accelerate the process. If we look at the phenomenal advances, we look at AIMS. When it was initially created, did we know we would get where we are today? And so what we don't realize, if you look at any great leader, they have failed more than everybody else because they have kept trying and got up and learned more, better, stronger, faster.
From their failures.
Absolutely.
Great. Josh, I'm going to come back to you, but before we do that, let's just quickly take a look at what is going on our social media platforms. All you need to do is simply add the hashtag InFocusRW if you want to tweet us. It helps us to actually track your tweets. One of them from Amanya Franklin says that the tech change is driving demand for skilled labor and spurring and upgrading of skills across economies. Emergence of a knowledge-based economy has spawned a new notion of workplace literacy, changing the relationship between employers and employees. Josh, definitely this comes to you. How do we ensure that also job losses are not, incurred in this sort of transition where now, hey, if you're changing this employer-employee relations because of the knowledge that you have, how do we keep the correlation as we continue on taking in the knowledge-based economies?
Well, I think there's a couple of things that need to happen. One is for people that are coming up, especially our younger generation that are just still learning about things, mm-hmm. we need to make sure they get all the experiences we're talking about. One of the things we're trying to push is actually they should get some industry experience. Mm-hmm. Get to work in companies, not even a full-time, do internship, do co-ops. This is what changes the U.S. economy, especially in the science engineering. Tons of people actually get to experiment while they're studying their college programs, their university programs, and they do a lot of internships. Right. But I think the most important thing is a lot of times also it's not the PhD that's needed, especially in technology. So this concept of the hardcore academic, but also some of the technical skills that are short two-year universities, basically colleges that exist for technical capabilities, especially nowadays with programmers, with people that are actually developing all the technology ideas, are not the people that have the PhDs. They're just people that are getting trained for a specific skill set. I think that's going to be key.
Right.
But I still think that in Africa, there's this fundamental gaps that exist that we need to continue to address, which is this human-centric, consumer-centric. Right here in Rwanda, I'll give you an example. One of the things we found out in the fact that the government is very open to actually share. This is true for all of Africa. This is true for a lot of countries, that girls actually miss 50 days of school because they can't find the right products for sanitary protection. That's just completely unacceptable. And one of the things we decided to do was a nonprofit. Again, here's the thing that we're talking about, how private sector and public sector could actually come together. In Rwanda, what we figured out was that there's a way to make those products locally and women would sell it to each other. So this is not companies like J&J just helping to make sure that a woman is able to create a business to sell to other women, because that's where the access issue becomes. Can they afford it?
Right.
You know what we do here in Rwanda? We actually go to the farmers for bananas. We collect the stem from the banana that they used to burn. And we worked with NC State, North Carolina State University in the US. We actually shipped a lot of the banana stems to US and asked them to help us convert it into an absorbable material. And they did. So now we actually produce here in Rwanda, not J&J, it's actually its own locally owned people that, it's almost a nonprofit that actually makes money, but the people make the money.
Right.
And we do that today. We actually produce quite a bit of sanitary napkins so that girls are not missing school. And I think as we look at this, we need to start thinking about what is hindering people from doing the things that they need to do.
Yes, yes.
And start plugging in where the gaps are.
Right.
And this is basically how you develop bottom up. And this is how you ensure that people are not waiting in the old economy jobs, that they could actually be educated, they could actually be trained, simple skills that allows them to advance some of the things that we're talking about here.
Perfect. Let's take a look at another tweet. Let's look at this one. This one is from Ndeye Absa, says, it's just switched on TV and found Eliane on In Focus. Question is how to duplicate best practices across Africa going through language barriers and cultural context. Eliane, this is very interesting. How do we do this?
So one of the things that is really important is how do we ensure that whether you're a francophone country, you're an anglophone, lusophone, how do we ensure that access is available to all Africans? So personally, I've been involved, I've been funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I've been a reviewer for Grand Challenges Canada as well as Grand Challenges Africa, and I'm a member of the African Academy of Sciences. And so it's to create opportunities for people to submit grant proposals, seed funding proposals in their languages of choice, and to create programs that allow all of Africa to be able to advance and learn forward. And the cultural context is critical because innovation happens within the context of culture.
So we should not force them to use a language which is not actually, in the context of where they come from.
It's really critical. In order to find out what is the tacit knowledge held by smallholder farmers, for example, it's really important to bring in people they trust. So here's one of the things. Trust accelerates business partnerships, relationships that will find what are the gaps that are missing so we can actually create value chains that are profitable. So it's really important to be of service to society. Josh just gave us a great example of being of service to something that's very important and intimate to young girls.
Right.
And so it's always, how do we take that cultural context, whether it's gender, whether it's language, whether it's location within the continent, those are critical because they will determine when the fit is right, we are creating sustainable long-term businesses.
Right. Very powerful. Thierry, I want to hear from you. Very important statement here, because at the end of the day, we will definitely need to nurture this creative culture. From the onset, she said, from the tertiary level. And it will be very important for us to understand the channels that we'll use to actually leverage the existing and growing African brain trust issue, but of course also the brain drain at the end of the day, because yes, we'll be bringing up this culture of creativity. As we have creative people, they will look for opportunity elsewhere. We've seen some of them leaving to look for opportunities elsewhere, away from our continent, away from our homes. How do we balance this to bring in the culture of innovation, culture of creativity, but also keep this, big minds, great minds within the continent?
First of all, using the concrete example of AIMS, the African Institute for Mathematical Sciences, what we're trying to do is to enable young Africans to do great science in Africa without having to go to the US, to London, or to Paris. It's important that we create for young learners in Africa the environment they need to do excellent science, the same as anyone could have done in New York or in Toronto. So second, the ecosystem approach, trying to produce graduates is not enough. It's not an end goal. What are they going to be doing after they graduate from university is extremely important. You have people who choose different streams. Some may want to go into academia and go on to PhD. Others wants to stop at master's degree level, and if not master's degree level, at engineering level, but they want to be able to find a job or start up their own enterprises. We also need to offer them the opportunities within the ecosystem to have the means to achieve their dream. It's all about opportunities. Why are there many young Africans crossing the Mediterranean and dying in the Mediterranean seas? Because they lack the opportunities they're seeking for and drowning in the Mediterranean. They lack those opportunities back home. So third, it's extremely important. I will get back to your brain drain issue.
Right.
It's important that we come to the reality, to fight with the reality that the way we learn, I get back to that, it's going to be foundational for Africa in the 21st century. What am I suggesting? 7 out of 10 children schooled today in Kigali would work in business areas that have never, ever existed. So what do you need? If it's the master's in sociology, master's in mathematics, and you think with the master's you're fit for job, it's wrong.
It's wrong.
What we need to learn is critical analysis. There are cross-cutting skills that every single person needs to learn. And then we need to emphasize and start this in our knowledge ecosystem. Now, back to your brain drain. I think when it comes to brain drain, it's still an issue. And if you have research scientists, for instance, you have skilled workers who lack opportunities back home.
They will go.
While there's opportunity in the US, they will go. So it's up to us. It's up to the policymakers to create the environment and industry to create the environment for these young people to stay here. Having said that, let us not get paranoia about brain drain. I think Elian mentioned many times in Canada. I lived in Canada. Josh was born in Eritrea, studied in Eritrea and in Sudan. Here we are in Kigali working. We're here. So whenever the ecosystem is ripe, when the opportunities are there, when the regulatory framework, they beg to come back, like most of us have begged to come back to Africa.
Right.
So let us keep that into proper perspective, not to dramatize brain drain, and focus on working to make opportunities available for our young people here.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Review a couple of examples.
Yes, yes.
One of the things that just recently we held a meeting in San Francisco for Africans in diaspora. This is in Silicon Valley. There were over 500 people, Africans, that own businesses across the US, Canada, Europe that showed up. And it's really interesting. Every time you talk to every one of them, if the right environment, actually, they all want to come back. And I know several of them in Lagos, a Nigerian woman, very young woman that started a business in Lagos. She goes back and forth between Silicon Valley. Recently, I was in Nairobi, and it's actually a coincidence. A woman I hired 15 years ago when I worked for Colgate-Palmolive, and I run into her at a cafe in Nairobi, and I said, "What are you doing here?" She said she left the company in the U.S. and moved to Nairobi to start a company.
Right.
I think we're seeing this a lot happening in the countries that are much more open about this whole building that ecosystem, like Rwanda, like Ghana, like Nairobi. And I think in terms of what we're seeing in Kenya, I think the more we see that in Africa, majority of the people, majority of the young people that we're seeing in US, Europe, and others, they want to come and help.
They will come and help.
There's brain flow happening. So I know a number of Rwandans who are coming back, creating enterprises, and who are getting involved in building local knowledge-led economies. So one of my mentors at the workshop in Women in Science that we just had, Sonia, is an industrial engineer, trained in Canada. She was working for one of the top aerospace companies in Canada, came here, is now working for Rwandair, and has gone back to Canada to purchase planes for Rwandair. This is one example. So one of my colleagues on the Presidential Advisory Council, Clet, was a senior vice president in major pharmaceutical companies. Now he runs his own Leaf Pharmaceuticals, and he's advancing new cancer drugs, and his passion is how do we ensure we're going to have new cancer drugs that are appropriate to African populations. And so he is investing in Rwanda in terms of building an ecosystem, investing in terms of partnering with the education system, with ensuring that we have the proper laboratories, ensuring that we have local biotechnology industry. And so the reality is there are a lot of people coming back, contributing. There are a lot of people who are looking at how do we connect. So I was also here for the Gender Summit. That was one of the pre-events to the next Einstein Forum. So Dr. Yvonne Buru, who's Kenyan, based in Paris, doing research in oncology at the Institut Pasteur. So she has been looking, she created a company called Med in Africa, and it's about connecting people that are doing discovery work in the health sector that are African in the diaspora and linking them back to the continent.
Right.
Because it's not about brain drain anymore. It's brain flow and leveraging brain flow to bring capital to Africa to accelerate our failure to success rate. Because when we have people who have experiences from the continent, who've worked globally, who've worked
They
decades,
become resourceful.
they become resourceful. A colleague of mine, Peter Ataja, based in China, working for Novartis, is doing a lot in Ghana, where he's coming from, to help build the innovation ecosystem. And there are a lot of Africans, because their heart is here.
So what we need is just the environment, the right environment.
Absolutely.
And they will be coming back.
Now, Eugene,
Yes.
Some people, some of the viewers or your viewers may say, I've met many young Africans here and in other countries who say, why are the African from the diaspora always demanding a lot? I'll create this environment, XYZ environment for me before I get back. They should come and work, sweat, roll up their sleeves and make the environment adequate for them to live in. They are true. They are correct. So we should not also be too much demanding on Africa, because the driver should be, what do I do? How do I give back? How do I help? Instead of sitting back, criticizing how poor this policy is, how inadequate this infrastructure is,
How inadequate the environment is.
how harsh it is,
Yes.
this village, and they're criticizing, watching CNN, watching BBC in New York, criticizing back
And
home.
tweeting.
And tweeting,
Yes.
you better get down here.
But
Roll up your sleeves and get it done. I totally agree with these young people who also say this.
Right.
Yeah.
I think one of the issues is there are a lot of people who are coming back, rolling up their sleeves before the ecosystem is built.
That's true.
If we think of Neil Turek
That's
and
true.
how he created AIDS.
That's correct.
At the beginning, there was nothing. If we think of Fred Swaniker, when he left the U.S. to create the African Leadership Academy and then the African Leadership University.
So what Thierry says is we need more of them to do that.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
But
There are
we
still many of
also-
them there.
Yes, yes.
Tweeting back home.
Right.
Yes, but we need to tell the positive stories, because what happens is the positive stories get drowned out. The positive stories inspire others to come.
Right.
And so it's very important.
To tell the right stories, the
Absolutely.
positive stories.
Well, I
And
think
that's
the
what
one thing
NEF
that-
is doing.
The one
Yes.
thing I would add is, again,
We're only
I
remaining
think
with
most-
1 minute, Abdul. So let's just try and start wrapping up. This is the part I hate about this show, when I'm starting to be told that we need to wrap up because our time is up. Let's just start sort of giving our parting remarks as we go.
I think the most important thing is not the ecosystem have to be perfect. People have to see the willingness of governments and policies in that direction. I think the people are willing to come back and build it. The question is, in order to come back and be able to build it, I think you need the willingness of policymakers to say, yes, we're going to support this. I think people will come.
They will come.
For me, it doesn't have to be a perfect system.
Right. Elian, one more time, in your closing remarks, is it a reality? We have seen, I've had a lot of knowledgeable people like you here. Are we ready to drive our economies? Is it a myth or still a fact, the knowledge-led economy?
We are driving our economies. We have tech companies that are starting to build prosperity. We have venture companies from around the world who are coming to see what's happening. We have pioneers in all sorts of fields, including artificial intelligence, coming from North America to Kigali because they want to be part of this great story that is how Africa is going to harness the fourth industrial revolution for all sectors and bring us new opportunities for all our youth coming up that are going to be able to benefit from these great new schools and be able to all be innovators and contribute to our sustainable growth.
Right. Thierry, you have the last word.
We are hoping to welcome all our participants to the next Einstein Forum from tomorrow.
Right.
Great things will be happening. And we're very happy that through the next Einstein Forum, we're trying with our partners, international partners, African partners, to bring Africa to the cutting edge of science. And to the young people, the opportunity is here. The time is now for them to contribute to transform this continent.
Right.
And to our leaders, I think we're offering them the platform to really guide us and tell us the agenda they have there for their nations and how we can fit in from our different respective areas of expertise.
Right. Powerful indeed. Alice, I don't know how many more minutes I have, but if I can just quickly go through. Alice, you can just whisper in my ears and tell me if time is up completely or if I have some time to go through some of these tweets right here. Very, very important messages coming through from our social media platform right here. One of them, I'd seen it earlier on, is here. Let's work for opportunities to be made. I don't know what's going on with me right here, but definitely this is what I'm supposed to be doing. There you go. There you go. Let's work for opportunities to be made available to young people on the continent in addressing the issue of brain drain. This is definitely a very powerful quote right there. One last one from Robert here. Where is it? Right, there you go. Robert is here. Oh my God, what am I doing? I think I'm rushing over this. I want to read this tweet from Robert, and I'll definitely be able to read it before we can go. If it refuses, we will source as I'm being told. There you go. Picking on Thierry's take on innovation ecosystem, it's surprisingly a similar situation in Japan, but the bases differ by orders of magnitude. Education needs disruption by the youth for the youth. Your thoughts? This is something that I'm hoping that Thierry and the team, you'll be able to, unless if you can quickly squeeze in 20 seconds. What is your thought on that? But basically, I think we can meet at the next Instant Forum. Let's tell him to come over there.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm inviting him next tomorrow.
Yes, indeed. Robert, you're invited at the next Instant Forum happening from tomorrow. Definitely, our time is up. I'm being told it's time to pave way for the news in English. And my name, as always, is Eugene and Nangwe. Thank you for watching. Thank you.
Rondair, renowned for its tremendous ability to fulfill your dreams, invites you to connect more with your friends and family in Europe with 3 weekly flights to Brussels, one of the most popular cities for the African diaspora. Take advantage of the exquisite service on board our punctual flights, connecting you to over 22 other destinations in our fast-growing network.
Rondair, fly the dream of Africa.
Now, a very good Sunday to all of you watching Rwanda Television. It's time for news in English, and here are some of our main stories.
President Paul Kagame and his Ugandan counterpart, His Excellency Yoweri Museveni, agree on infrastructure, transportation, economy, and security aspects. During the Africa Science Workshop, scientists called for African governments to empower the research sector. RPF party officials in Kigali City pledged to tackle malnutrition and poor sanitation. Ex-Catalan leader Carles Puigdemont detained in Germany.
A very warm welcome once again to News in Details. I am Friday James taking you through now.